What is up, everyone? Welcome back to The Collision. It is Daniel here, and I am excited, honored today to be joined by a very special guest, and that is the one and only Rian Johnson. He is the writer and director of the new film Wake Up, Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery, which releases on Netflix on December 12th. Thanks, Ryan. I know this is a very busy week for you, but thanks for stopping by to chat about this film.
Oh, thanks, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I should say right from the start, there's a lot of stuff to jump into with this film. A lot of things I want to pick your brain on. But first off, I love this film. This is a fantastic film. So congrats on what you pulled off.
Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Maybe to start, like I said, there's a lot of interesting things going on in this film. Maybe start just from the beginning, as far as kind of the genesis of this film. As you began the creative process, I'm curious, like where do you begin to start finding ideas for the next Knives Out movie? Is that something where you're like looking at culture and sort of finding inspiration, or maybe looking internally, or what is sort of the genesis of that creative process?
Yeah, it starts looking internally, and I mean, it was really specific with this one. I mean, there's a reason it's set in a church. I started out wanting to make this one personal, and so that's why it's kind of about faith. I grew up very Christian. I grew up evangelical Protestant. Even though the movie's set in a Catholic church, I grew up Protestant. But I was through my childhood, teenage years, early 20s, I was personally very deeply Christian. I was a youth group kid, and and I'm not a Christian anymore, and so it's something that I have a lot of feelings about, and so that was kind of the starting point for me, was using this film as an opportunity to have kind of a multifaceted conversation with myself about this thing that's very deeply personal. I got deep roots in, and can I do that in the context of a big fun Benoit Blanc mystery? It was a challenge.
Yeah, and you can definitely feel this definitely feels like a very personal film. Some things I want to ask you about that. I did want to ask you before we get into that. There is a point in this film where Reverend Jed is sort of jokingly called Father Brown, which is a reference to G.K. Chesterton's sort of Catholic mystery story. Obviously, the reference fits like the context of the story, but are those stories ones that you read, growing up, or that influenced you in any way?
Yeah, and I reread them before I wrote the
Okay.
script. They were a huge influence on this. I love Chesterton's writing in general and his novels. I love the Father Brown mysteries though. And the huge, I guess one of the big things I drew from them was, Father Brown is a great detective, not because he understands the holy and the perfect, but because he understands the imperfect in the human and has empathy for it and the sinfulness of man. And so I don't know, it felt like it was a little bit of a, if anyone hasn't listening hasn't read the Father Brown mysteries, I'd highly recommend it if you like murder mysteries, and they wrestle with moral issues also, which I don't know, it makes them fun.
Yeah, well, I'm a Chesterton guy, so I appreciated you throwing in that reference. Like you said, this is a very personal story from you. Like you said, you're raised up in a religious household. Kind of like, how did that influence the story? Like, were there any particular experiences from your childhood, either positive or negative, that you made sure you really wanted to portray like in this story?
I mean, there are so many. And I guess yeah, there were so many. I mean, especially during those specific years, during kind of teenage into like young man years, the fact that my relationship with Christ was really the lens that I saw the entire world through, as the basis of my life. I mean, that forms a bedrock that, even though I'm not a believer now, that's always there in some shape or form. There's a scene in the movie where Benoit Blanc, Daniel Craig's detective, when he first enters the story, he and Father Judd, who's Josh O'Connor's character, they have a conversation in a church about faith. And Blanc, who is very much a cynical, kind of very cynical about the church, and he's very much an atheist, he kind of gets uncomfortable in the church surrounding. He kind of unleashes a little tirade against the church, and he doesn't hold back. And then Father Judd, I think, really generously kind of like, but answers him in a way that truly answers him. And suddenly they're meeting as equals. And for me, that scene was important because it's not that identify with one side or the other. For me, I have both of those people inside me, and and so this movie is kind of an opportunity to have both of those sides that are both always present inside me and let them start talking. I think all of us, to a certain extent, I know even when I was a Christian, to certain extents, you always have kind of some version of those two kind of in dialogue inside you. So, yeah, but that's kind of one example of kind of just how I drew from where I was at.
Yeah, and that scene you mentioned is my personal favorite, scene in this film. I think this, brilliant dialogue and like you said, just mutually respective, both sides being honest with each other in a way that doesn't feel condescending either to religious people or to atheistic people. So, definitely, I think an embodiment of what I personally loved about this film, which I know a lot of people are, latched on to that aspect of it. This film, from those that have seen it already, through the theatrical release, I know a lot of religious people have expressed that this is one of the most like authentic depictions of faith that they've seen, in a movie for a long time. As a person of faith, I agree with that sentiment. How was, you sort of touched on this a little bit, but how important was that to you to sort of be authentic in that way? And kind of how did you go about ensuring that level of sort of respect?
Yeah, it was tremendously important to me, and I think, and I don't think I would have attempted it if it hadn't come from my own personal experience. And I think that's also kind of the answer to the second part of your question is how did I come in and kind of check myself and make sure it wasn't going to be, um, just trading in cheap stereotypes or kind of being finger waggy one way or the other. And the reality is, I think I came in and was able to just sort of have that internal dialogue with it and not fall into those things um, because I have experienced it, and because uh, uh, you know because I was a believer during such a formative time in my life, and I think that bedrock doesn't go away, and the shape of that is always there. And honestly, even to write this movie, it was a very deep, interesting experience because I had to I couldn't write it from my perspective today. I had to put myself back in my perspective as a believer and really engage with that. And both the things I valued from that time and also the things that I wished were different about that time. So in that way, it was, yeah, I guess the answer is kind of just drawing on my own personal experience as a believer is where it all came from. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of people are really appreciating that, especially from the religious community. Kind of one of the other tensions that really is all throughout this film is kind of the contrast between church leaders who adopt like the role of a warrior or a shepherd. You kind of have that symbolized by Father Judd at several times throughout this film, and you kind of see that contrast between the two priest characters. But I think maybe even more powerfully within the character of Judd himself, just internally. Why, sort of in your eyes, like, why do you think that is such a relevant theme to explore, perhaps even in ways that transcend just like a specifically religious context?
100%. I mean, that for me it's the most timely element of the movie, and it's also the thing though that is the most timeless, I guess. And for me it very much also uh it is personal. I like what you said about the conflict being represented inside Judd, and in that way, Wicks, kind of just is prompting something that is there inside Judd that Judd is struggling against, and that was my experience as when I was a Christian. There was definitely. It's not like there were different camps or different, pastors who were on the side of having Christ, having the selfless love of Christ versus getting on war footing. It was more like those were two clouds that were intermingling, that were kind of always present, and I was getting doses of both of them. And those were triggering things inside me that I was kind of like dealing with. And so, um, but the timeliness of it, it transcends even the world of the church. I mean, right now, as someone who is in the secular world, I think that's the I'm as guilty as anyone of doom scrolling through my social feed and just getting my fists up and getting angry about the big capital T them out there that is like out to get me and I'm persecuted by whatever. I feel like, and the antidote to that is right there in kind of the teachings of Christ that I grew up with is love your enemy and is arms open wide. So yeah, it's something that unfortunately feels very timely.
Yeah, and I love that, and I think another kinda, seems like another through line throughout this film is just the role of storytelling, either for good or bad, either to, to deceive people or to guide them, towards truth, and, in the scene you mentioned earlier, that kinda opening conversation between the 2 characters, Father Judd has a great quote where he says, "I guess the question is, do these stories convince us of a lie, or do they resonate with something deep within us that is profoundly true that we can't express any other way except storytelling?" And maybe can you just speak a bit just on that quote and perhaps like how that resonates with you, like yourself being a storyteller?
Yeah, I mean, and that very much for me was, I think for me that's also kind of the connective tissue between my life now as a non-believer and who I was when I was a believer. That's something that is consistent between the two of those things is deeply believing in and valuing sort of how we use stories as human beings. Not and when I say stories, sometimes that can imply that they're just like little lies that are made up to make us feel good or something. To me, it's the opposite of that. To me, it's something that is deeply and profoundly true. And I love that Judd gets to express that in the movie. I don't know, it's similar to how, Jesus taught through parables, Jesus taught through stories, and I feel like there is something about stories that as human beings, it helps to open our heart up when we're sitting down and we're pulled into a story in a way that can then communicate, truth in a way that a lesson or a sermon maybe couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I love that. Just this that through line all throughout the film, especially in Daniel Craig's character Blanc, his own personal journey. Kind of last question for you. Obviously, I know you want to entertain people. That's probably your primary goal when making a film like this. But is there anything else that you hope audiences take away? Kind of beyond box office or Netflix streaming numbers or reviews and any of that stuff. Like, what kind of makes one of these films, in your eyes, a success?
Well, with this one specifically, I mean, the thing that was kind of scary going into it was, I feel like especially today in a secular movie, talking about religion is sort of a third rail, and I feel like it's something not just in my life, but in so many people I talk to after they've seen this movie, whether they are Christians, whether they're of another faith, whether they're atheists, everybody has grown up and has had some kind of experience with the church and with faith. And I think we want to talk about it. I feel like there's so much to talk about with it. It's so deeply personal to each one of us. And I guess that's the thing that I would maybe hope for with this film. I mean, the film doesn't aim to kind of like teach a specific lesson or something. I think it would be didactic if it did. But what it does aim to do is have a conversation, and if that conversation continues outside the theater, that's kind of the most you can hope for with art, I think.
Yeah, and I know, like I said too, appreciate that, and even just the way this film models that respectful, kind of cutting through the toxicity to actually have those conversations. So I do think this film is already doing that, and I know it will continue to do that when it releases on Netflix on December 12th. But thank you so much, Ryan. This is a fantastic film. Like I said, cringe. Everyone, go check out this film, and job well done. Thanks for taking the time to chat about it.
Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate it, man.